A humiliated Biden administration is now turning to Venezuela and Iran for oil. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. In this video, we're going to take a look at the current military state of the Ukraine crisis. We're going to see how Bumblin Biden is literally groveling before Venezuela and Iran to help him out of his own crisis. And stick me to the very end of this video when we'll learn whether this will all work out for Biden or whether this is just going to further humiliate an already abject presidential failure. You are not going to want to miss this. Greetings, everyone. Dr. Stevie with you. Great to be with you as always. Welcome to your Patriot Professor's Den, where I help you to think better so you can feel better in these crazy and turbulent times. If you haven't already done so, you know what to do. Make sure to smack that bell and subscribe button. Before we begin, make sure to click on that link below and support this channel by visiting our awesome merch store. It has all kinds of t-shirts and swag for you and for the Patriots in your life. We've got our super cool Let's Go Brandon shirts. We got some brand new Freedom Truckers shirts that you're going to love. We got our Rhino Hunting shirts, you name it, all just by clicking on the link below. The most common feedback that we get is how often random people are going to come up to you and give you super awesome compliments on your shirts when you wear them out in public. It's so cool. So, yeah, and keep in mind, your purchases, of course, are going to be spreading Patriot hope as well as supporting this channel. So make sure to click on that link below or go to store.turleytalks.com. That is store.turleytalks.com. All right, gang, let's dive right in here. We've just got so much to talk about in terms of the latest developments with the Ukraine crisis that's enveloping so much of the world. And in today's video, we're actually going to find out precisely why the crisis is indeed a worldwide crisis, a crisis on a global scale. Briefly, in terms of where we are in the war itself, it's becoming increasingly clear that Russia is conducting their warfare in Ukraine along the same model they used in Syria. So this is basically turning out to be Syria Part 2. This is in effect what Alexander McCurry said the Duran podcast is calling it. Again, if you are not following the Duran and their amazing daily analysis of the Ukrainian crisis, I simply couldn't recommend a more insightful geopolitics podcast. I'll put a link down below for you to go over and check them out. You're really missing out if you're not subscribed to the Duran. Make sure you do that today. But Alexander's analysis, I'm noticing, is starting to get picked up by the wider media. What the Russians want to do with Ukraine is the same thing they want to do with Syria. And they were quite successful, by the way, at doing. They want to change Ukraine. They want to disrupt the kind of political system that has formed in Ukraine since the Maidan Revolution 2014 and refashion that system into one that's far more hospitable to Russian interests. So what this involves is this. Just as Russia wanted to drive jihadists out of Syria so as to restore the pro-Russian Assad government, so now the Russians are attempting to drive out the ethno-nationalist elements of Ukraine known as the Azovs. Okay, these are the avowed, neo-Nazis. There's been a number of articles written on them over the years by the New York Times, the Washington Post. The Azovs are the most powerful political movement in Ukraine, arguably, and they want to fully establish an anti-Russian ethno-state. And by the way, they want to replicate throughout the European continent as well. They're no fans of the EU either. So Russia's plans right now is instead of jihadists in Syria, they're trying to expel the Azovs in Ukraine, at least, in the capital city, Kiev, and the whole of eastern Ukraine. And we should know, I do agree with Colonel Douglas McGregor's analysis. I don't think Russia cares a whit about Western Ukraine. This is all about bringing Eastern Ukraine, right, the part of Ukraine east of the Dnieper River, back into an alliance with Russia and in turn establish a neutral state in the rest of Ukraine in the West. And so what Russia is trying to do here is they kick out the so-called far-right Azovs out of the corridors of political power. Russian officials are at the same time trying to form alliances with the anti-Azov factions in the Ukrainian government in Kiev and thus establish a legitimate Ukrainian government recognized around the world, but that has been effectively neutralized of radical anti-Russian sentiment via the Azov. So that's the latest on the military front, as I understand it. Of course, what I just laid out for you is what Russia wants. I mean, there's no guarantee that that's what they're going to get, right? We'll have to see how it all plays out in the days and weeks ahead. But it is becoming increasingly clear that we are seeing Syria Part 2. Russia having taken over roughly about 40% of Ukraine, particularly eastern Ukraine, the Donbass region. They're now ready to expel the Azovs from power in a manner comparable to the way they expelled the jihadists in Syria, and then established diplomatic relations with the new Ukrainian government cleansed of radical anti-Russian factions. But as all that's taking place, there's no question, at least in my mind, that perhaps the single most, frankly, embarrassing aspect to all of this is the Bumblin Biden administration demonstrating for all the world to see how absolutely and totally incompetent they are. If you can believe it, old Sleepy Joe is actually groveling before Venezuela, and I kid you not, Iran, in order to supplement the oil that we would cut off in trade with Russia. And keep in mind, these two nations are solid allies of whom? Of course, Russia. I mean, you literally can't make this stuff up. It's so bizarre. Biden officials are literally groveling before Nicolas Maduro, the president of Venezuela. They are in Caracas. Biden officials are traveling to Venezuela, not the other way around, mind you, hoping beyond hope that Maduro, who the United States has been calling, quote, an insult to democracy over these past years. Yes, that Nicolas Maduro, they're hoping beyond hope that he'll be willing to turn his back on Russia. I mean, can you even begin to fathom what Venezuelan officials are thinking about all this? I mean, how much laughing there must be in the back rooms of Caracas? I mean, you might be asking, how do we get here? How did it come to this obviously humiliating scene of American officials begging Venezuela and Iran for oil? Well, as I'm sure you've seen for yourselves, Bumblin Biden is overseeing the highest oil and gas prices in nearly 20 years. And this is nothing, by the way. We've only begun to see what this crisis is going to do to oil and gas prices, which, of course, when they go up, force everything else, every other commodity to go up. Not to mention the fact that Russia, again, is a massive commodities exporting superpower. So the disruption of Russian trade is going to quite literally disrupt everything. But that reality isn't stopping the woke radicals in both the Democrat and Republican parties from doing just that. As we speak, the House of Representatives is indeed considering the banning of Russian oil imports. Again, if you don't know, Russia is a major oil exporter to the United States as well as the world as a whole. In 2020, for example, Russia produced 10.1 million barrels per day of crude oil and natural gas. Given that the United States burns nearly 20 million barrels per day of oil and gas, I mean, we're obviously going to need to supplement Russia's exports if we boycott them. But there's a problem to that. You see, Biden squandered the energy independence that we achieved under President Trump. As you know, Biden is beholden to the ideological environmental radicals that have taken over his party. So he can't increase drilling here at home. Remember, not only did Biden and his fellow Democrat governors shut down pipelines, when they take power, like the Keystone, or what Governor Whitmer did in Michigan with the Line 5 pipeline, which delivered 500,000 barrels of crude oil a day. But current regulatory hurdles have made it all but impossible to build new pipelines, which has placed a great deal of pressure on existing energy infrastructure. So we're totally maxed out in terms of our domestic oil production, given the ideological lock and key that we're all currently imprisoned under. And so that means that we have to look elsewhere for oil production. And lo and behold, that means nothing less than the Biden administration groveling before two major oil exporters, Venezuela and now even Iran. Now, the key question, of course, is whether all this is going to work. In short, the answer appears to be a definite no. Yet, we might say. I don't think either Venezuela or Iran will be willing to abandon Russia for the United States, simply for the fact that geopolitically, the United States is frankly so ridiculously volatile. All it would take is just another election in a matter of just a couple of years with a whole new administration coming in. And whatever deals Venezuela and Iran worked out with the United States under Biden could be scrapped entirely. I mean, that's not going to happen with Russia. Russia, Venezuela, and Iran have had a very solid, consistent relationship for years now, for good or for bad. It's irrelevant, right? The stability of the Russian as well as Chinese geopolitical order is a very difficult benefit to give up in favor of a desperate and clearly impulsive D.C. So we'll obviously have to see what happens here, but clearly we're seeing the continued incompetence of the Bumblin Biden administration here. And today's groveling before Venezuela in particular has only added public embarrassment to that incompetence. Now, before you go, you will definitely want to check out my latest video I just uploaded on how Ukraine is actually on the verge of collapse, all as the new world order implodes. You're not going to want to miss that. So make sure to click on the link, and I'll see you over there. God bless.